You don't notice the cracks at first, you just live in the house, admiring the view from the windows, believing the walls are solid. You dust the surfaces, you polish the fixtures, you tell yourself this is what a life built together looks like. It's only when the whole structure groans under a sudden weight that you see the fissures, thin as spider silk, running through everything you thought was strong. For me, that groaning started on a perfectly ordinary Sunday, the kind of day that was supposed to be filled with the warm, yeasty smell of a roast in the oven and the comfortable murmur of my family around me. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. I was in the kitchen, my hands wrist-deep in flour for a pie crust. It was my mother's recipe, one I could make in my sleep. The rhythm of it, the cutting of the butter into the flour, the sprinkle of ice water was a meditation. Through the arched doorway, I could see the living room. David, my husband of 30 years, was in his leather armchair, the one that had molded itself to the shape of his body over 2 decades. He was staring at his phone, his thumb scrolling, a little furrow between his brows that had become a permanent fixture. He was 55, and the handsome young man I'd married was still there, but layered over with the weight of business and, I see now, a certain restless dissatisfaction. Our son, Mark, was 27, sprawled on the sofa, his long legs taking up too much space as he talked animatedly about some new cryptocurrency he was investing in. "It's a sure thing, Dad. You've got to think bigger. The old ways of building wealth are obsolete." David would grunt, not looking up from his phone, a sound that could have meant agreement or dismissal. It was a conversation they'd had a dozen times, a familiar dance. And then there was Chloe, my beautiful 24-year-old Chloe. She was perched on the arm of her father's chair, painting her nails a vicious shade of crimson. She'd just moved back home after her latest job in fashion PR didn't align with her core values, as she'd put it. Having her back was a bittersweet ache. I loved the sound of her in the house, but her presence felt transient, like a beautiful bird that had landed for a moment before flying off to a more exciting branch. This was my constellation, my family. For 27 years, my life had revolved around their orbits. I was the gravity that held our little world together. I was the one who remembered the doctor's appointments, who knew where the spare key was hidden, who wrote the birthday cards signed from all of us, who made sure there was always milk in the fridge and a listening ear at the end of the day. I was the architect of our comfort, and in doing so, I had made myself a part of the scenery. Necessary, but unnoticed. Like the foundation of a house, buried deep and never seen. Auntie Grace, my mother's softer, more sentimental sister, had tried to warn me once. It was over tea at her cluttered, cozy house, surrounded by porcelain figurines and the scent of lavender. She'd patted my hand, her own skin soft and papery. "You give so much of yourself, Ruthie," she'd said, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "Just make sure you're keeping a little piece of you, just for you. A garden no one else is allowed to tend." I'd smiled, sipping my Earl Grey. "Oh, Grace, this is my garden, this is what I wanted." She'd looked at me with a sadness in her kind eyes that I didn't understand then. "A garden needs a strong fence, darling, or others will trample the flowers, thinking they're just weeds." I thought she was being dramatic. Now, I think she was seeing the cracks I was determined to ignore. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. "I'll get it," Chloe sang out, blowing on her nails. A moment later, the room was filled with the formidable presence of Auntie Clara, my father's sister. Where Grace was softness, Clara was sharp angles and unflinching truth. She was 75 and carried herself with the authority of a retired Supreme Court justice. She surveyed the scene, David on his phone, Mark on the sofa, me flowered in the kitchen, and her lips pursed. "Well," she said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Don't everyone get up at once on my account." I wiped my hands on my apron and went to greet her, kissing her cool, powdered cheek. "Auntie Clara, I'm so glad you could make it." "I said I would, didn't I?" she replied, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She handed me a bakery box. "I brought a cake. I assumed you'd have done everything else, as usual." It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. Clara saw the mechanics of our family with painful clarity. Lunch was a familiar affair. I carried platter after platter to the table, the herb-crusted roast beef, the Yorkshire puddings that puffed up golden and perfect, the honey-glazed carrots, the gravy made from pan drippings. The compliments were brief, automatic. "Great meal, Mom," Mark said, already loading his plate for a second helping. "Yeah, thanks, Mom," Chloe echoed, pushing her carrots to the side. David carved the meat. A duty he'd always performed, a small kingship he'd claimed. He held the carving knife and fork with a certain authority, and for a moment, watching him, I felt a surge of the old affection, the one that had been worn smooth by time and responsibility. He looked up and caught me staring, and for a fleeting second, something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like guilt, or maybe just weariness. Then it was gone, and he gave me a small, tight smile. "Everything looks wonderful, Ruth," he said. It was the kind of thing he said to a particularly efficient waitress. "Thank you, David," I said, and the moment passed. It was over dessert, my apple pie and Clara's rich, dark chocolate cake, that the first real tremor hit. The faith-find conversation had drifted to Mark's new business venture, something to do with eco-friendly real estate development. "It's all about leverage, Dad," Mark was saying, his enthusiasm filling the room. "We secure the initial capital, and then the project practically funds itself. We just need a show of faith from our initial investors to get the ball rolling." David was nodding, that thoughtful furrow back between his brows. "It's a solid plan, son. Aggressive, but solid." Chloe, ever the opportunist, chimed in. "If you're looking for a branding and communications director, I'm available. I have some incredible ideas." I smiled, watching them, this little cabal of ambition. "It sounds very exciting, Mark," I said. He glanced at me, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "Yeah, it is, Mom. It's not just exciting, it's the future." I felt the gentle dismissal like a small pinch. I was about to ask a question, something about the environmental impact, to show I was engaged, but David spoke first. "Actually," he said, clearing his throat and setting his fork down with a deliberate click, "this is as good a time as any. I have some news." The room went quiet. Even Clara paused, a bite of cake halfway to her mouth. "News?" I asked, my pie suddenly feeling like a lump of clay in my stomach. He didn't look at me. He addressed the table, but his words were aimed at Mark and Chloe. "I've decided to take a sabbatical, a long one. 6 months, maybe a year." A sabbatical? David was a partner in a demanding law firm. He hadn't taken more than 2 consecutive weeks of vacation in 30 years. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, trying to inject warmth into my voice, trying to quell the sudden, inexplicable panic rising in my chest. "Where are we thinking? Italy? Maybe a tour of the Scottish Highlands? We've always talked about that." He finally turned to look at me, and his expression was strangers. It was placid, closed off. No, Ruth, not we. Me. This is something I need to do for myself. A solo trip, a reset. The air was sucked out of the room. Solo. The word hung there, ugly and final. Whoa, Dad, that's epic, Mark said, a grin spreading across his face. A midlife crisis road trip? Are you buying a Porsche? David almost smiled. No Porsche, just time, to think, to rediscover myself. Chloe clapped her hands. Oh my God, that is so brave. To just go. I love that for you, Daddy. They were celebrating it. They were treating it like a quirky, adventurous whim. They didn't see the tectonic plates of our life shifting beneath our feet. I looked from my son's admiring face to my daughter's envious one, and finally to my husband's detached one. I was the only one who felt the earthquake. A solo trip, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. For a year. It's not a divorce, Ruth, David said, and his tone was lightly exasperated, as if I were a child overreacting. It's a sabbatical. I've worked hard, my entire life. I've provided. I think I've earned it. We've earned it, I thought. I've earned it. I'd been right there beside him, building this life, this family. I had provided the foundation upon which his career, his comfort, his very ability to take a sabbatical was built. Auntie Clara was the one who broke the silence, her voice cutting through the celebratory fog like a shard of ice. A reset, David. At your age? What exactly is it you're trying to reset? And what, pray tell, is my niece supposed to do while you're off rediscovering yourself? Hold her breath? David's jaw tightened. He'd never liked Clara. Ruth will be fine. The house is paid off. The accounts are full. She can finally focus on her hobbies. He waved a hand vaguely in the direction of the kitchen, as if my entire existence could be contained within its four walls. Hobbies. The word was a slap. My life's work, my nurturing, my love reduced to a hobby. I see, Clara said, her tone implying that she saw far, far more than he wanted her to. She gave me a look that was both pitying and fiercely knowing. The rest of the meal passed in a blur for me. The conversation moved on, swept up again in the drama of David's grand plan. He was already talking about destinations, Southeast Asia, maybe South America, places we had dreamed of going together. Mark and Chloe were offering suggestions, laughing. It was as if I had vanished from the table. Later, after the dishes were done and the goodbyes were said, after Mark had gone back to his apartment and Chloe had retreated to her room to video call her friends about her father's amazing journey, I stood at the sink, looking out into the darkening garden. David came up behind me, but he didn't touch me. You're upset, he stated. I didn't turn around. It would have been nice to have been part of the conversation, David, before you announced it to the whole world. It was a spontaneous decision, he said, and I knew it was a lie. The furrow in his brow, the late nights at the office, the distance that had been growing for months, it had all been leading to this. This wasn't spontaneous. This was a planned exit. Spontaneous, I echoed, the word tasting like ash. Look, Ruth, he said, his voice dropping into the patronizing tone he used when he was about to explain something he thought was beyond my comprehension. This is something I need to do. For my mental health. You wouldn't understand the pressure I've been under. You have your little life here, your routines. This is my version of that. My little life. The cracks weren't just visible now. I could feel the cold wind blowing through them. I finally turned to face him. In the dim light of the kitchen, the man I had loved, had built a home and a family with, looked like a polite stranger who had overstayed his welcome. "When do you leave?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "In 3 weeks," he said. "I've already spoken with the firm." 3 weeks. He'd already spoken with the firm. He had a timeline. He had it all figured out. And in all his figuring, I had been a variable. He had neatly accounted for the wife who would stay behind and tend to the little life. He leaned in and gave me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. "It's going to be fine, Ruth. You'll see." He walked out of the kitchen, and I was left alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the crushing weight of his words. I looked around the beautiful, spotless kitchen, the heart of the home I had built. It felt like a museum now, a beautifully preserved exhibit of a life that was already over. I was the curator, left behind to guard the empty shelves. They had all forgotten about me, David, in his quest for self-discovery. Mark and Chloe, in their self-absorbed admiration of his bravery. They saw me as part of the scenery, a fixed point, like the old oak tree in the garden, that would always be there, unchanging, requiring nothing. But even oak trees need roots that run deep to survive a storm. And as I stood there in the silent, darkening house, I had the terrifying thought that my roots had been slowly, carefully severed, and I just hadn't felt it until now. The loneliness didn't feel like an absence. It felt like a presence, a cold, dense thing settling in the space where my family used to be. And in that moment, though I didn't know it yet, that loneliness began to whisper a question, one I hadn't asked myself in 30 years. "What about you, Ruth? What do you need?" The 3 weeks before David left were a strange, suspended time, like the eerie calm in the eye of a hurricane. Life carried on with a grotesque semblance of normality. I still made breakfast, I still did the grocery shopping, I still asked about his day when he came home from the office, later and later each night. But the air in our house was thick with things unsaid, a heavy silence that pressed down on the furniture, on our conversations, on my chest. He was packing. Not with the frantic energy of a man going on an adventure, but with the meticulous, detached precision of a surgeon. He bought new luggage, sleek and black and impossibly expensive. He ordered specialized gear, a water filter for remote locations, a first aid kit I wouldn't know how to use, quick dry clothing that felt alien to the touch. These items would appear on the doorstep, little monuments to the life he was planning without me. I tried, once, to breach the wall. It was a Tuesday evening. The smell of his new, waxed canvas duffel bag filled the bedroom. He was rolling socks into tight balls, a skill I'd never seen him employ in 30 years of marriage. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "David," I began, my voice softer than I intended. Are you sure about this?" "Truly sure. It feels so sudden. So extreme." He didn't look up from his task. "We've been over this, Ruth. It's not sudden for me. I've been thinking about it for a long time. But a year? Alone? What about us? What about our plans? We were going to travel when you retired. We talked about buying a little place by the coast." The words sounded pathetic, even to my own ears. The dreams of an old woman, clinging to scraps. He finally paused, holding a rolled pair of gray socks in his hand. He looked tired. "Those were your plans, Ruth, not mine. My plan was to work myself into an early grave to pay for this house, for the cars, for the kids' degrees and their false starts." He gestured vaguely, a sweeping motion that encompassed all the trappings of the life we'd built. "I don't want a little place by the coast. I want to see the world before I'm too old and brittle to enjoy it. Your plans. Not mine." The words were a physical blow. For 3 decades, I had operated under the foolish, foundational belief that our plans were the same, that our dreams were woven from the same thread. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. To have him so casually unravel that fabric, to show me that the pattern I had been so carefully following was one he had never agreed to, left me breathless. So, this is it? I whispered, the fight gone out of me. This is the reset. Erasing us? He sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to come from the very bottom of his new duffel bag. It's not about erasing you. It's about finding me. You'll be fine. You have the house. You have your routines. You'll probably barely notice I'm gone. He went back to his packing, and I sat there, utterly demolished. You'll barely notice I'm gone. Was that truly what he thought of me, of our life together? That my role was so superficial, my presence so passive, that the removal of the central character from the stage would leave the play unaffected? I was the stage manager, the set designer, the person who sewed the costumes and prompted the lines. Of course I would notice. The whole production would collapse. The day he left was unnervingly bright and sunny. A day for beginnings, not for endings. His taxi arrived at precisely 10 a.m. Mark and Chloe were there, of course, to see him off. It was a scene of bizarre festivity. "Send pics, Dad," Mark said, clapping him on the back. "That beach in Thailand with the full moon party, you have to check it out." "Oh, and the markets in Bangkok, Daddy. The silk is incredible," Chloe chimed in, hugging him tightly. "Bring me back something beautiful." They treated it like he was going off to college, not abandoning his marriage. They were excited for him. I stood on the front steps, my arms crossed over my chest, feeling like a spectator at my own funeral. David turned to me last. There was a moment of awkward hesitation. A hug felt too intimate, a handshake too formal. He settled for placing a hand on my shoulder, his touch light and brief. "Take care of yourself, Ruth," he said. His eyes didn't meet mine. They were focused on some distant point over my shoulder, on the horizon he was so desperate to reach. "You too, David," I managed to say, my voice a hollow echo. And then, he was gone. The taxi pulled away from the curb, turned the corner, and disappeared. Just like that. 30 years, and it ended not with a bang, but with the soft click of a car door and the fading sound of an engine. The silence that descended upon the house then was different from the tense quiet of the previous weeks. This was a true, profound silence, an absence. Mark and Chloe lingered for a few minutes, filling the void with chatter. "He's gonna have the best time," Mark said, scrolling through his phone. "All right, I'm off. Got a meeting with the investors. Thanks for everything, Mom." He kissed my cheek and was gone. Chloe hovered. "It's going to be so weird. Just the two of us here, isn't it?" she said, a slight pout on her lips. "I guess I'll have to keep you company." She said it as if she were conferring a great favor upon me. "That would be nice, Chloe," I said, my tone flat. She looked at me, her head tilted. "You're not going to be all mopey about this, are you, Mum? I mean, it's so negative. Dad's pursuing his happiness. We should be supportive. It's a very enlightened way to approach a midlife transition." I stared at my daughter, this beautiful, shallow creature I had raised. Where had she learned this? This language of self-actualization that somehow excused the wholesale abandonment of responsibility. I wanted to shake her, to scream. He didn't transition, he left. He left me! But the words wouldn't come. I just felt a vast, weary sadness. "I'm going to go for a walk," I said instead, turning away from her. I walked for hours with no destination. The streets of our neighborhood, which usually felt so familiar, seemed alien. I saw other couples my age walking together, talking, their hands linked or their shoulders touching. I saw them working in their gardens, washing their cars, normal, everyday life. And I was on the outside of it, a ghost looking in. The loneliness I had felt. The night of his announcement was no longer a presence, it was a climate. The very air I breathed was thin and cold. When I returned, the house was dark. Chloe had gone out. I was truly alone. I stood in the center of the living room, in the house that was now just a house, not a home. It was too quiet. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was like a hammer blow in the stillness. I did what I always did when I was unsettled. I cleaned. I wiped down the already clean counters. I vacuumed the pristine carpets. I found myself in David's study, a room I rarely entered, his sanctum. It smelled of him, of his cologne and old leather. The desk was tidy, his computer gone. But in the wastepaper basket, I saw a crumpled ball of paper. A reflex, a lifelong habit of tidying, made me pick it up and smooth it out. It was a printed email. The subject line was a flight confirmation. Bangkok, just as Chloe had mentioned. But it wasn't for a flight in 3 weeks' time. It was for a flight that had departed 2 days ago. My breath hitched. Why would he have a confirmation for a flight he didn't take? My eyes, now sharp with a new, terrible focus, scanned down. The passenger name wasn't just David Miller. It was David Miller and Sarah Jennings. Sarah Jennings. The name meant nothing to me. It was a stranger's name. But it was a name on a flight confirmation, nestled in my husband's trash, for a flight that had left before he had even told the children about his spontaneous trip. The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. The lies weren't just about his need for space. For a reset, they were specific. They were detailed. They involved a woman named Sarah. This was the first thread. And as I stood there, holding that damning piece of paper, I felt a terrifying, exhilarating sensation. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a spark of something hot and sharp. It was the beginning of anger. The unraveling had begun, but it wasn't just my life that was coming apart at the seams. It was his story. And I, the quiet, unnoticed wife, the keeper of the trash, had just found where to pull. The crumpled email felt like a live wire in my hand, buzzing with a dangerous, ugly truth. Sarah Jennings. The name echoed in the silent study, a ghost already taking up residence in my home. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a sabbatical. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was a plan crafted with lies and sealed with a betrayal so casual it took my breath away. I carefully folded the paper, my movements slow and deliberate, as if handling a venomous snake. I tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan, a secret now burning against my hip. The quiet of the house was no longer just empty, it was accusing. Every polished surface, every neatly arranged cushion, seemed to mock me. "This is what you built your life on," they whispered. A man who would discard you with a lie and a flight confirmation in the trash. I couldn't stay there, the walls were closing in. I grabbed my purse and my keys, my hands trembling so violently I could barely fit the key into the car door. I didn't know where I was going. My mind was a white noise static of panic and pain. But my hands, it seemed, knew the way. They drove on autopilot through the familiar streets until I found myself pulling into the driveway of a small, rose-clad cottage that belonged to Auntie Grace. She must have seen me through the window, because the front door swung open before I could even knock. Her face, usually wreathed in a gentle smile, fell the moment she saw me. "Ruthie," she said, her voice full of immediate concern. She opened her arms, and I fell into them. I didn't cry. I was too numb, too frozen from the inside out. I just stood there, shaking in her floral-scented embrace. "Grace," I managed to choke out. She led me inside, to her cozy sitting room, settling me on the chintz sofa and pressing a cup of sweet, steaming tea into my hands. "Now, you tell me," she said, her voice firm but kind. "What has happened?" I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and handed it to her without a word. I watched her face as she read it, saw the way her kind eyes widened, then softened with a deep, sorrowful understanding. She didn't gasp or cry out. She just let out a long, slow breath, as if she'd been expecting a blow, and now it had finally landed. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, laying the paper gently on the coffee table as if it were a holy relic of a terrible sin. "I am so sorry." "The flight was 2 days before he left, Grace," I said, my voice flat. "He was already with her. The whole performance with the children, the packing, the sabbatical, it was just a show, for me." Grace reached over and took my cold hands in her warm ones. "I know, darling, I know." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Clara and I, we had our suspicions. The distance, the new clothes, the way he looked at you sometimes, as if you were a problem he hadn't yet solved. We didn't want to say anything, to hurt you without cause." "You knew?" The question came out as a wounded whisper. Had I been the only one blind? "Not this," she said, gesturing to the paper. "Not a name, not proof, just a feeling. A sickness in the air around him, a man building a separate life piece by piece, right under your nose." Just then, the front door opened and closed with a decisive thud. "Grace, I've brought the scones from that new bakery, and I must tell you, they are an absolute scandal of raisins." Auntie Clara's voice trailed off as she entered the sitting room and saw me. Her sharp eyes took in everything in an instant, my pale face, my shaking hands, the terrible piece of paper on the table. She set the bakery box down with a thump. "He's done it, then," she stated. It wasn't a question. Grace silently handed her the flight confirmation. Clara didn't need her reading glasses. Her gaze was as sharp as a hawk's. She scanned it, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. A muscle in her jaw twitched. "The trash," she finally said, her voice dripping with a cold, pure contempt. "He couldn't even be bothered to shred it. He thinks so little of you. He assumed you'd never even venture into his sacred space, let alone have the wit to look in his wastepaper basket. The arrogance of the man is breathtaking." Her words, though harsh, were a bracing tonic. They didn't coddle my pain. They validated my anger. She saw the insult, not just the injury. "What do I do, Clara?" I asked, my voice small. "What do I do?" Clara sat down in the armchair opposite me, leaning forward, her hands clasped. "You stop being Ruth the nurturer. For just one moment, you stop. Right now you must become Ruth the detective. Ruth the survivor. The woman you were before you married him, she's in there somewhere. Find her." "But the children," I began, a fresh wave of agony washing over me. "Mark and Chloe. They were so excited for him. They think he's some kind of hero." Clara's expression was grim. "Then they are fools, raised in a gilded cage of their father's making and your maintenance. The question is, are they complicit?" The thought was so vile it made me nauseous. "No, they couldn't be, they wouldn't." "Wouldn't they?" Grace interjected softly, her face pained. Chloe lives for drama and excitement. Mark sees his father as a business mentor. This sabbatical plays into both their narratives beautifully. The truth is messy and ugly. They may not want to see it. Precisely, Clara said. So for now you say nothing to them. You gather your evidence. You be quiet and you be smart. Do you have access to the bank accounts? The financial statements? I blinked. The finances. David had always handled them. I had a debit card for the household expenses, a credit card he paid off. I logged into the joint account sometimes to pay bills. But the investments, the savings, the main assets, that was his domain. I think so. The passwords are in his desk. First thing tomorrow, Clara commanded, you go through that desk. You find every statement, every password, every record. You take pictures of everything. You make copies. You do not confront him. You do not cry to the children. You become a shadow. You learn everything. It felt alien, this call to subterfuge. It went against every instinct I had, which was to call, to scream, to demand an explanation. But a colder, harder part of me, a part I was just beginning to acknowledge, knew they were right. David had been planning this for months, maybe longer. He had the upper hand. He had the narrative. I was just the wife he'd left behind. If I was to have any chance, I needed to arm myself. I spent the next 2 hours in the warm, safe cocoon of Grace's sitting room, the two of them flanking me like seasoned generals preparing a rookie for battle. Grace provided the tea and the comfort, the gentle bolstering of my spirit. Clara provided the strategy, the cold, hard facts I needed to face. Assume everything is gone, Clara said bluntly. Assume he has been moving money. Assume he has a lawyer. Assume the worst, Ruth. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. That way, you cannot be surprised. When I finally drove home, the numbness had been replaced by a low, thrumming anxiety, but also a sliver of purpose. The loneliness was still there, a vast, dark ocean around me, but Clara had thrown me a rope made of passwords and bank statements. The house was still dark. Chloe was out. I went straight to David's study, my heart pounding again, but this time with a different kind of fear. This was the fear of discovery. I turned on his desk lamp, the pool of light feeling like a spotlight on my clandestine activities. I found the leather-bound notebook where he kept all his passwords, tucked away in the top drawer. My hands were slick with sweat as I flipped through it. There were passwords for everything. His email, his brokerage accounts, the mortgage, even the security system. He was so organized, so sure of his own control. I took out my phone and began taking pictures of every page. Then, I went to his computer. He'd taken his laptop, but the desktop was still there. I woke it up, my pulse roaring in my ears. I typed in the password for his email, Chloe1999, our daughter's name and birth year. A fresh stab of pain. The inbox loaded. I didn't have to search for long. There was an email chain with Sarah. The subject line, Itinerary V4. I clicked on it. The top was the flight confirmation I already had. Below it, a list of hotels. A villa in Thailand, a boutique hotel in Bali, all booked for 2. And then, at the bottom, a message from David to Sarah, sent just a week ago. Almost there, my love. The last act with the family is the hardest. She's so clueless, it's almost pitiable. But soon it will be just you and me and the Sunday. I've set everything in motion on this end. The first transfers are done. She won't even know what hit her. I read it once, then again, and a third time. She's so clueless, it's almost pitiable. The words didn't just hurt, they eviscerated. They reduced 30 years of my life, of my love, of my work, to a punchline. I was a pitiable fool. An obstacle in the last act of his play. And then, the other part. The first transfers are done. Clara's warning echoed in my mind. Assume he has been moving money. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a clarity that was more terrifying than any pain. This wasn't just a broken heart. This was a financial siege. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to leave me with nothing. I leaned back in his chair, in his space, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like a claimant. This was my life too. My security, my future. The loneliness I felt then was different from before. It wasn't a passive sadness. It was a solitary vigilance. I was alone, yes, but I was also awake. The whispers in the shadows had become a clear, cold voice in my own head. It was time to listen. I picked up my phone, not to call David and scream, not to cry to my children. I opened a new browser tab and began to search for the best forensic accountants and divorce attorneys in the city. The spark of anger I'd felt in the kitchen had been fanned into a steady, determined flame. The game was on, and David, in his arrogance, had just forgotten that the quietest people are often the most dangerous opponents. We have nothing left to lose, and everything to learn. The glow from the computer screen painted the dark study in a sickly blue light. The words from David's email, pitiable, transfers, were seared onto the back of my eyelids. I felt a strange dissociation, as if I were watching a movie about another woman's life collapsing. This couldn't be my reality. This was the kind of sordid drama you read about in cheap magazines, not the life of Ruth Miller, 53, PTA mom, community volunteer, maker of excellent apple pie. But the cold leather of David's chair beneath me was real, the frantic thumping of my heart was real, and the digital trail of betrayal glowing on the monitor was undeniably, horrifyingly real. Clara's voice was a drill sergeant in my mind. Assume everything is gone. I opened a new tab and logged into our main joint banking portal, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. The password, MillerFam2001, was another relic of a life I now understood was a carefully constructed facade. The home page loaded, showing the checking and savings accounts. The balances looked normal, healthy even. A wave of relief, foolish and fleeting, washed over me. Maybe he hadn't. But Clara's voice was insistent. Look deeper. I navigated to the transaction history. Scrolling back over the last 6 months, everything seemed in order. Mortgage payments, utility bills, transfers to my household account. Then I saw it. Not a massive, suspicious withdrawal, but a pattern. Every 2 weeks, on a Friday, a transfer of $9,500 was made to an account listed only as SJ Holdings, LLC. The memos were vague. Investment, capital contribution, business development. $9,500. Just under the $10,000 threshold that would trigger a mandatory bank report. It was a number chosen with deliberate, malicious intent. I did the math in my head, my stomach clenching. Over 6 months, that was over $114,000. Money I never knew was missing. Money from the account that was supposed to fund our retirement, our future, SJ Holdings. Sarah Jennings. The initials were a slap. This was just the checking account. With a growing sense of dread, I navigated to the investment portfolios, the retirement funds, the brokerage accounts. The passwords from David's book granted me access to a fortress of our shared financial life, a fortress he was quietly dismantling from the inside. The picture that emerged was one of systematic, calculated erosion. I saw stock portfolios that had been liquidated, with the proceeds funneled into new, private investment vehicles, with names like Bali Ventures and Horizon Futures. Our joint money market account, which should have held a comfortable six-figure cushion, was down to a few $1,000s. A second mortgage had been taken out on our paid-off home just 3 months prior. The $250,000 loan disbursed to an account I didn't recognize. I felt the air leave my lungs. He hadn't just been planning to leave me, he had been, financially, strangling me for months, ensuring I would be not just heartbroken, but destitute and trapped. The man I had shared a bed with for 30 years had been looking at me across the breakfast table and seeing a mark. A pitiable obstacle to be cleared away with the minimum of fuss and cost to himself. A quiet sob escaped me, a raw sound in the silent house. But it was followed immediately by a surge of white-hot rage, so pure it was almost exhilarating. This was no longer about a broken heart, this was about survival. I worked through the night, a solitary sentinel in the glow of the screen. I took screenshots of every suspicious transaction, every altered account, every transfer to an SJ Holdings or a Bali Ventures. I compiled them into folders, labeled and organized. I was no longer Ruth the betrayed wife. I was Ruth the archivist of my own financial ruin. And with every click of the mouse, every captured image of David's duplicity, I felt a piece of my old self slough away, replaced by something harder, sharper. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the slats of the blinds, I heard Chloe stirring upstairs. I quickly logged out of everything, wiped the browser history, and left the study, closing the door softly behind me. The evidence was safe, stored in a password-protected folder on my phone, and emailed to a new secret account I'd created. The element of surprise was my only weapon, and I would not squander it. The next few days were a masterclass in acting. I played my part to perfection, the slightly sad, slightly lost wife, adjusting to her new solitude. I made small talk with Chloe, who was too absorbed in her own world to notice the new, flinty resolve in my eyes. I answered a few brief, perfunctory calls from David, who was now in Thailand, his voice breezy and full of fabricated tales of serene beaches and personal enlightenment. I made all the right, wistful sounds, all while imagining the screenshots of his financial betrayals burning a hole in my pocket. I knew I needed professional help. The labyrinth of LLCs and investment vehicles was beyond me. Clara, ever practical, had already texted me the name and number of Eleanor Vance, a divorce attorney known for being, in Clara's words, a pit bull in a pinstripe suit. I called her from my car, parked in a grocery store lot for privacy. Eleanor's voice was calm, measured, and devoid of pity. I outlined the situation, my voice shaking only slightly as I mentioned the flight confirmation and the transfers. "I need you to send me everything you have, Ruth," she said. "Every screenshot, every email, every password. Then, I want you to meet with the person I work with. His name is Ben Carter. He's a forensic accountant. He's the best at following the money. He'll see things we would miss." 2 days later, I was sitting in Ben Carter's sterile, beige office downtown. He was a man in his 40s with a kind, unassuming face that belied a mind like a steel trap. I handed him a thumb drive with my compiled evidence. For an hour, he scrolled through it in silence, his expression neutral, occasionally humming softly. Finally, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Ruth, what you found is the tip of the iceberg. A very deliberate, very sloppy tip. Sloppy? I asked, confused. It had felt meticulously hidden to me. The consistent transfers just under the reporting threshold, the use of LLCs with such obvious naming conventions. This isn't the work of a financial mastermind. This is the work of a man who is arrogant. He thinks you're financially illiterate and that no one is looking. He's left a trail a mile wide. He turned his monitor toward me. See this? SJ Holdings. It's a shell. The money goes in, and then it's immediately forwarded to an account in the Cayman Islands. Bali Ventures? Same thing. He's not investing, he's hiding. And not very well. He clicked a few more keys, pulling up the records for the second mortgage. And this is the real problem for him. This is bank fraud. He took out a loan on a jointly owned asset without your signature. How did he manage that? I thought back, my mind racing. There was a stack of papers a few months ago. He said it was a refinance to get a better interest rate for some home improvements we were talking about. He told me to just sign on the sticky tabs. I was making dinner, I signed. Ben's eyes held a glint of grim satisfaction. So, he forged your signature on the final mortgage documents, or had a notary falsify them. Either way, that's a felony. Ruth, he hasn't just been unethical. He's been criminal. The word hung in the air. Criminal. My husband. The father of my children. What does this mean? I whispered. It means, Ben said, that the power dynamic has just shifted. Dramatically. He thinks he's the puppet master, but he's just handed you the strings. Eleanor is going to have a field day with this. I left Ben's office feeling like I was walking on a different planet. The sun was too bright, the sounds of the city too loud. The ledger of lies was no longer a secret I held in terror, it was a weapon. David, in his arrogant, pitiable view of me, had made a catastrophic error. He had forgotten that the person who manages the household, who stretches a budget, who plans for a future, understands the value of money in a way a man who simply earns it never can. He saw dollars and cents. I saw security, and effort, and love. I drove home, the weight of the evidence in my purse feeling less like a burden and more like a shield. When I walked in, Chloe was in the kitchen, eating yogurt straight from the container. "You've been out a lot, Mum," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Seeing your sad aunts again?" I looked at my daughter, at her casual cruelty, so like her father's. The shield around my heart hardened. "No, Chloe," I said, my voice calm, eerily steady. "I've been seeing a lawyer." She finally looked up, her spoon frozen in mid-air, her eyes wide with shock. The first crack in their perfect, oblivious narrative had just appeared, and I was the one who had put it there. The game was indeed on, and for the first time I felt like I was holding the winning cards. The silence that followed my statement to Chloe was more profound than any I had ever experienced. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, they all ceased to exist. There was only the wide, stunned expanse of my daughter's face, her mouth a perfect, glossy O of disbelief. "Eh? A lawyer?" she finally stammered, setting the yogurt container down with a clatter. "What for? Why would you need a lawyer?" The part of me that was still her mother, the part that soothed scraped knees and worried about her eating enough greens, wanted to soften the blow. But the newer, harder part, the part that had seen the cold, hard numbers of my own planned obsolescence, held firm. "What do you think for, Chloe?" I asked, my voice still calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Your father didn't go on a sabbatical. He left me, and he didn't just leave me. He's been systematically stealing from us for months." Her face cycled through emotions rapidly: confusion, denial, and finally, a flash of defensive anger. Stealing? Dad? Don't be ridiculous, Mum. That's a horrible thing to say. He's just finding himself. He's been under a lot of pressure. You don't understand what it's like. I understand that he transferred over $100,000 to his girlfriend's company. I said, the words clinical and sharp. I understand he took out a second mortgage on this house by forging my signature. I understand that he's been lying to all of us. That's what I understand, Chloe. Her face paled, but the anger won. Girlfriend? What are you talking about? You're being paranoid. You're just jealous that he's finally doing something for himself after all these years of slaving away for this family, for you, for me. The words were a masterclass in rewriting history. The narrative David had spun was so potent, so appealing in its simplicity, that my own daughter had absorbed it completely. He was the hero, breaking free. I was the anchor, trying to drag him down. He didn't slave away alone, Chloe, I said, my voice beginning to shake with a fury I could no longer contain. I was here. I built this home. I raised you and your brother. I managed every birthday, every holiday, every crisis. I made his life possible. And his reward was to call me pitiable in an email to his mistress and plot to leave me with nothing. You're lying, she shrieked, tears of rage now springing to her eyes. You're making this up because you're lonely and bitter. You're trying to turn us against him. I don't need to turn you against him. I fired back, the dam of my patience finally breaking. His own actions are doing that just fine. Look at the evidence, Chloe. It's all right here. I gestured to my purse, where my phone, with its damning folder of proof, was stored. But she wasn't listening. She was already grabbing her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling Mark. He needs to hear this. This insanity. Within 20 minutes, Mark was there, bursting through the front door, with a scowl etched deep on his face. What's going on? He demanded, his gaze swinging from Chloe's tear-streaked face to my stony one. Chloe said you're having some kind of breakdown, Mom. That you're accusing Dad of, what? Embezzlement? It's not an accusation, Mark. It's a fact. I laid it out for him, as calmly as I could manage. The flight with Sarah Jennings. The transfers to S.J. Holdings, the second. Mortgage. The emails. He listened, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression growing darker with every word. But unlike Chloe's emotional outburst, his reaction was cold, calculating. So, you've been snooping through Dad's private emails and financial records, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. That's a massive invasion of privacy. I stared at him, dumbfounded. An invasion of his privacy? Mark, he was stealing from our joint accounts. He committed fraud. He was managing his assets. Mark shot back. You have no idea the pressure he's under, the complex financial decisions that have to be made. Those transfers were probably for our new venture. He told me he was securing capital. You just don't understand high-level finance. I felt the ground crumbling beneath my feet. They were a united front, not of children protecting a parent, but of business partners protecting their investor. David had not just been a father to them, he had been a brand, and I was threatening the brand. This new venture seems to include a villa in Thailand with his girlfriend, I said, my voice tight. Oh, for God's sake, Mom, grow up. Mark exploded, throwing his hands up in the air. So he has a girlfriend. Maybe he needed someone who actually supports his ambitions instead of just maintaining a house and making casseroles. The air left my lungs. It was the same sentiment as David's email, spoken aloud by my own son. She's so clueless, it's almost pitiable. I was just the maintenance crew, the casserole maker. Chloe, emboldened by her brother's support, chimed in, her voice a vicious sneer. Yeah, Mum. Maybe if you'd been more interesting, more of a partner to him, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. You've let yourself go. You're just Mom. And now you want to punish him for wanting more out of life. I looked at them, these two beautiful, entitled strangers I had given birth to. I saw my love for them reflected back not as gratitude, but as contempt. I had devoted my life to their comfort, and in doing so, I had created monsters who valued ambition over integrity and personal fulfillment over basic human decency. The last vestige of my hope that they would see the truth, that they would stand with me, shriveled up and died in that moment. A profound, chilling calm settled over me. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady. They both stared at me. What? Mark said. Get out of my house. I enunciated each word with icy precision. This is still my home, and I will not be spoken to like this in my own home. Your home? Chloe laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Dad pays for this house. And I have the bank statements that show how he illegally mortgaged it. I replied, my gaze locked on hers. So until a judge says otherwise, it is mine. And you are not welcome here if you are going to defend a man who committed fraud against your mother. Now, leave. The shock on their faces was almost comical. They had never seen me like this. I was always the accommodator, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, the one who yielded. Mark recovered first, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. Fine, if that's how you want to play it. But you're making a huge mistake, Mom. You're going to end up alone. You're going to regret this. He grabbed Chloe's arm and pulled her toward the door. She went, shooting a look of pure hatred back at me. You're a bitter, old woman. She spat out before the door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the house. The silence that returned was different from before. It wasn't empty. It was charged. It was the silence after a battle. I stood alone in the kitchen, my body trembling with adrenaline and a grief so vast I thought it might swallow me whole. I had not just lost my husband, I had, in that moment, lost my children. I walked slowly to the window and watched them get into Mark's car, their movements sharp with anger. As their car pulled away, I didn't feel the crushing loneliness I expected. Instead, I felt a terrifying, exhilarating sense of finality. The bridges were burned, there was no going back. The conversation replayed in my head, their words casseroles, let yourself go, just Mom lancing me with fresh pain. But with every painful memory, the new, harder part of me grew stronger. They had shown me who they were. They had chosen their side. I picked up my phone, my hand steady now. I opened the email to my secret account and began to type a new message to Eleanor Vance, attaching the audio recording I had, on a gut instinct, started the moment Mark had walked in. Subject, update. The confrontation has happened. My children have made their allegiances clear. I am ready to proceed. Full speed ahead. I hit send. The die was cast. The war was no longer just with David. It was with the entire world he had built around me. A world that valued me only for my utility and now discarded me for my lack of it. But as I stood in the wreckage of my family, I realized something. For the first time in 30 years, I was no longer living for them. I was fighting for myself. And that was a cause I finally understood. The meeting with Eleanor Vance was held in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and old money. The walls were paneled in a rich, dark wood, and the large table gleamed under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind you of the immense, cold power of the law. I sat alone on one side of the vast table, feeling small and out of place in my simple knit cardigan. Eleanor entered, a compact woman in her 50s with a severe, intelligent face and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a thick file folder, which she placed on the table with a definitive thud before taking the seat opposite me. "Ruth," she said, her voice brisk but not unkind. "I've reviewed the materials from you and Ben Carter. I've also listened to the audio recording of your conversation with your children." She paused, letting the weight of that settle. "This is, without a doubt, one of the most egregious cases of financial fraud and spousal duplicity I have seen in my career. Your husband isn't just a cheat, he's a thief and a forger. And your children," she chose her next words carefully, "have been profoundly manipulated." Hearing her say it so bluntly, in this sterile, powerful room, made it both more real and more surreal. This was no longer a family drama. It was a case. I was the plaintiff. David was the defendant. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now," Eleanor said, opening the folder, "we go to war, and we do so from a position of considerable strength, thanks to your diligence." She slid a stack of papers toward me. "This is the petition for divorce. We are filing on the grounds of adultery and constructive abandonment. But more importantly, we are attaching a motion for a temporary restraining order and an emergency hearing for spousal support and the freezing of all marital assets." The words were a jumble of legal jargon, but their intent was clear. We were hitting first, and we were hitting hard. "A restraining order?" I asked, confused. "He's in Thailand." "It's a financial restraining order," she explained. "It prohibits him from selling, transferring, encumbering, or hiding any marital asset down to the last teaspoon. Given his history, the judge will grant it ex parte without him being present. It also demands the immediate repatriation of all funds he has moved offshore. If he violates it, he could face contempt of court, which carries jail time." Jail time? The concept was so foreign, so drastic, it made me dizzy. The man I had loved was now facing the prospect of a cell because of me. Part of me, the old Ruth, recoiled at the thought. But the new Ruth remembered the words pitiable and the second mortgage, and that part stayed silent. "We will also be subpoenaing all records from the banks, the investment firms, and the LLCs he created," Eleanor continued. "We will depose his business partners. We will follow every cent. Our goal is not just to get you your fair share, Ruth. Our goal is to dismantle the financial structure he has built to hide his theft and to make him whole again with you." She said it with such cool conviction that I almost believed it was possible. "And what about the children?" Eleanor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That is the harder part. They are adults. The court has no sway over their relationships. The recording is powerful, but it is for our strategy, not for them. You cannot force them to see the truth. All you can do is protect yourself. Sometimes, Ruth, in order to survive, you have to be willing to let go of the people who are actively trying to drown you." Her words were a cold balm. They didn't heal the wound, but they stopped the bleeding. The papers were filed the next day. The storm, which had been brewing in the shadows of my life, was now a matter of public record. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the confrontation. For 2 days, nothing. Then my phone rang. It was David. I took a deep breath and answered, putting it on speakerphone. Eleanor had advised me to record all communication. Ruth, his voice was a low, dangerous growl, stripped of all its previous faux enlightenment. What the hell is this? I just got served by a process server at my hotel. A restraining order? An emergency hearing? Have you completely lost your mind? The anger in his voice was so visceral, I could almost feel it through the phone. The old me would have flinched, would have apologized, would have backed down. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. "No, David," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "I've found it." There was a stunned silence on the other end. He hadn't expected that. He had expected tears, hysteria, weakness. "What is this garbage about forged signatures and hidden assets?" he snarled, recovering. "This is slander. I'll sue you for defamation." "It's not slander if it's true," I replied. "I've seen the mortgage documents, David. I've seen the transfers to SJ Holdings. I've read your emails to Sarah. I know everything." The line went so quiet I thought we'd been disconnected. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. It was colder, more calculating. "You've been snooping through my private things. That's illegal." "Your password was our daughter's name and birth year," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You didn't exactly make it difficult. And as for the rest, I had every right. It's my money, too." "It's my money!" he roared, his composure shattering. "I earned it. I built that wealth. You just spent it, you and your domestic bliss. You think making a pot roast is an equal contribution? You are entitled to nothing." Each word was a hammer blow, designed to break me, but they only reinforced the fortress of my resolve. He had truly believed it. All of it. "The court will decide what I'm entitled to, David," I said. "And according to my lawyer, given the fraud and the adultery, it's likely to be quite a lot, including a portion of whatever is left of the money you sent to the Cayman Islands." I heard a sharp intake of breath. He hadn't thought I'd traced it that far. "You listen to me, you vindictive bitch," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You drop this. You drop this right now, or I will make your life a living hell. I will drag this out for years. I will turn Mark and Chloe against you so completely you will never see them again. I will make sure you end up in a studio apartment eating cat food. Do you understand me?" The threat was ugly, direct, and I knew he meant every word. This was the real David, stripped bare of all his pretenses. This was the man who saw me as an obstacle to be crushed. A strange sense of peace descended over me. The monster was out in the open. There was no more guessing. "I understand you perfectly, David," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "And my answer is no. I'm not dropping anything. See you at the hearing." I ended the call. My hands were trembling, but my spirit was not. He had thrown his worst at me, and I was still standing. The next volley came from Mark. His text was terse and to the point. "How could you do this to Dad?" "To us? You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I had entered the legal labyrinth, a twisting, turning path of paperwork, deadlines, and brutal strategy. It was a lonely path, but for the first time I was the one holding the map. And with every threat David made, every cruel word from my children, the path ahead, though difficult, became the only one I could take. I was no longer lost. I was navigating my way out. The days after the phone call with David stretched into a bleak, gray landscape. The house, once a source of pride and comfort, felt like a gilded cage. Every room echoed with memories that had now been poisoned. The leather chair in the study was no longer David's reading spot. It was the command center from which he had plotted my financial ruin. The kitchen island where Chloe had painted her nails was now the stage where she had eviscerated me with her contempt. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a vacuum, sucking the very air from my lungs. The legal machinery was in motion, a distant, rumbling engine operated by Eleanor and Ben. But in the day-to-day, I was alone with the fallout. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a grief so heavy I could barely get out of bed. I would wander from room to room, picking up a photograph of us on a beach vacation, Mark and Chloe, small and laughing, David's arm around me. And the pain would be so acute I'd have to physically sit down. This was the loneliness I had feared. It wasn't just being alone. It was the terrifying realization that the world I had inhabited for 3 decades was a fiction, and I was the only one who had believed in it. I was an actor who had stumbled off the set into the cold, empty soundstage, realizing the props were fake and the other characters had already gone home. I stopped answering the phone. The few friends who called, having heard whispers of the ugly divorce, left messages filled with a pity that felt like salt in a wound. "Oh, Ruth, we're so sorry, if you need anything." But what could they do? They couldn't unhear the words pitiable or give me back my children. Their lives, with their intact families and planned retirement cruises, were a universe away from my wreckage. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the hall closet, staring at David's winter coats. Without thinking, I started pulling them out, throwing them into a heap on the floor. I grabbed armfuls of his shirts, his trousers, his stupid, expensive ties. I was possessed by a frantic energy, a need to purge his physical presence from this house. I dragged the pile to the garage, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and stuffed it all into black trash bags. But when I was done, standing amidst the bulging, shapeless sacks, I didn't feel victorious. I felt foolish. He was in Thailand, wearing new clothes, living a new life. He wouldn't miss any of this. My grand gesture of cleansing was meaningless. The despair crashed over me then, a wave so powerful it brought me to my knees on the cold concrete floor. I wept, great, heaving sobs that tore from a place so deep inside I didn't know it existed. I cried for the girl I had been, who had believed in love and forever. I cried for the wife who had tried so hard to build a home. I cried for the mother who had lost her children. I cried until I was empty, until there was nothing left but a hollow, aching shell. I don't know how long I stayed there. But a sound finally pierced my stupor, a firm, insistent knocking at the front door. I didn't want to answer. I wanted to disappear into the concrete. But the knocking continued, rhythmic and unyielding. Wiping my tear-streaked face on my sleeve, I stumbled to the door and opened it a crack. Auntie Clara stood there, holding a casserole dish covered in tinfoil. Her sharp eyes took in my puffy, red-rimmed eyes, my disheveled hair, the tracks of tears on my cheeks. She didn't say a word. She simply pushed the door open, walked past me into the house, and headed for the kitchen as if she owned the place. I followed her, numb. She set the casserole dish on the counter with a clatter and turned to face me, her hands on her hips. "You look like hell, Ruth." I let out a wet, choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Thank you, Clara. That's very helpful." "It's an observation," she said bluntly. "Not a criticism. Now sit." She pointed to a kitchen chair. "I Saturday." She filled the kettle and put it on the stove. The familiar, domestic sounds a strange counterpoint to the chaos inside me. She moved around my kitchen with an efficiency that was both comforting and intimidating. "Grace is worried sick about you," she said, not looking at me as she fetched 2 mugs. "She wanted to come, but she gets too emotional. She'd just sit here and cry with you, and that wouldn't do either of you any good. So, she sent a lasagna. I'm here to deliver the hard truths." The kettle whistled. She poured the boiling water into the mugs, the steam rising like a ghost between us. "You think you're the first woman to have her life pulled out from under her?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "You think you're the first to feel this pain? My Arthur, God rest his soul, was a good man, but his brother, my brother-in-law Albert, he walked out on his wife, Margaret, after 25 years. For his secretary, took everything he could. Left her with 2 teenage boys and a mountain of debt he'd hidden." I looked up, surprised. I remembered Aunt Margaret, a quiet, faded woman who had died years ago. I never knew the story. "What did she do?" I whispered. Clara brought the mugs over and sat opposite me, pushing one toward me. "She fell apart, just like you are now. For a year, she was a ghost. We thought we'd lost her. But then, one day, she stopped. She looked at her boys, who were angry and lost, and she decided she was all they had. She got a job as a receptionist at a dentist's office, a job she was ridiculously overqualified for. She worked. She saved. She fought Albert for every penny she was owed, and it was a nasty, ugly fight. It took 5 years. But she bought a small house. She put those boys through college. She found a strength she never knew she had. She fixed me with her piercing gaze. She found it because she had to. There was no other choice. You have no choice, Ruth. David has seen to that. You can lie down on this floor and let him win, or you can get up." "I don't know if I can," I admitted, the confession tearing at my throat. "It hurts too much. The children have made their bed," Clara said, her voice unforgiving. "They are adults who have chosen to worship the golden calf their father has become. You cannot save people from their own poor judgment. You can only save yourself." "It's not that simple," I cried, frustration welling up. "They're my children, and you are their mother," she fired back, her voice rising. "And right now you are showing them what a woman does when she is betrayed." She either collapses, confirming every pathetic thing their father has said about her, or she stands up, fights for what is hers, and teaches them a lesson about consequence and strength that they will never forget. Which lesson do you want to teach them, Ruth? That their mother was a pitiable doormat? Or that she was a force to be reckoned with? Her words were like a bucket of ice water. She had used David's word pitiable as a weapon. And it worked. The self-pity that had been clinging to me began to recede, burned away by a spark of shame and then a flicker of defiance. I thought of Margaret, a woman I had barely known, fighting her way out of the darkness. I thought of Clara herself, a widow who had never remarried, who had built a life of fierce independence. I thought of Grace, whose gentle spirit hid a core of resilient steel. I was not the first. I would not be the last. I was not alone. I looked at Clara, at the uncompromising love in her stern face. She wasn't here to coddle me. She was here to arm me. She was lending me her strength until I could find my own. I took a sip of the tea. It was hot and strong, just the way she liked it. "Eleanor says the emergency hearing is in 10 days. I said, my voice still rough, but clearer now. Clara gave a sharp, satisfied nod. Good. What do you need to do to be ready? I need to go over the financial disclosures with Ben again. I need to write a statement for the judge. I need to. I took a deep breath. I need to buy a new suit. I'm not going into that courtroom looking like a woman who has been beaten. I'm going in, looking like a woman who is ready to fight. A rare, genuine smile touched Clara's lips. It transformed her face. Now, she said, you're talking. She stayed for another hour, not talking about the case, but about mundane things, the neighbor's unruly dog, a book she was reading, the best place to buy a good, affordable suit. It was a lesson in itself. Life went on. The world continued to turn, and I was still a part of it. After she left, the house didn't feel quite so empty. The silence wasn't so loud. The grief was still there, a deep, aching wound, but it was no longer septic with self-pity. It was a clean pain, the kind that could, eventually, heal. I went upstairs and stood in front of my closet, looking at my collection of comfortable, shapeless cardigans and sensible trousers. The uniform of the invisible wife. I reached in and pulled out a navy blue blazer I hadn't worn in years. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but it had structure. It had authority. I held it up in front of me, looking at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were still shadowed with pain, but for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something else. Something borrowed from Clara, perhaps. Something that belonged to Margaret. Something that was, I dared to hope, the beginning of my own. It was strength. The suit was a revelation. It was a simple, elegant sheath in a deep charcoal gray, with a matching jacket that nipped in at the waist and gave my silhouette a definition I hadn't seen in years. Standing in front of the department store mirror, I didn't see a pitiable, discarded wife. I saw a woman with a purpose. Clara, who had insisted on accompanying me, gave a curt nod of approval. Now you look like you're on your way to a board meeting, not a bake sale, she'd said, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. That small boost of confidence carried me through the final, intense preparations for the emergency hearing. Ben Carter had compiled a devastating, color-coded report tracing David's financial trail. Eleanor had drilled me on my testimony until I could deliver it in my sleep, my voice steady and devoid of the hysterical emotion David's lawyers would undoubtedly try to provoke. I was ready. Or so I thought. The day before the hearing, needing a moment of quiet normalcy, I went to a small, independent bookstore downtown. A place I'd loved for years, but had rarely visited since my life became a series of errands for other people. I was browsing the fiction section, running my fingers over the spines of novels about lives far removed from my own, when I heard a familiar, tinkling laugh. It was a young woman's laugh, bright and unself-conscious. I glanced over and saw her, 2 aisles over in the travel section. She was tall and slender, maybe in her early 30s, with a cascade of honey blonde hair and the kind of effortless style that comes from not having to think about a budget. She was holding up a lavish coffee table book about Indonesian art. "Isn't this breathtaking, David?" she said, her voice carrying in the quiet shop. "It reminds me of that carving we saw in the temple near Ubud." My blood ran cold. "David." I slowly moved to the end of my aisle, peering through a gap in the shelves. And there he was, my husband. He looked tanned, relaxed, and 10 years younger. He was wearing clothes I'd never seen: linen trousers, a loose-fitting shirt, and he was smiling at her with a fond, proprietary expression that made my stomach turn. "Everything reminds you of Bali, Sarah," he said, his voice warm and indulgent. Sarah. Sarah Jennings. The name from the flight confirmation. The recipient of my stolen money. She was no longer a phantom, a name in an email. She was real, standing not 20 feet away from me, touching my husband's arm, sharing an intimate memory of a trip funded by my gutted retirement account. A white-hot fury, so intense it was almost paralyzing, surged through me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to overturn the bookshelf. I wanted to march over there and rake my nails down her smug, beautiful face. The carefully constructed composure I had built for the courtroom shattered in an instant. But as I stood there, trembling, watching them, something else happened. The rage didn't subside, but it cooled, hardening into something more useful, a cold, sharp curiosity. This was the woman for whom he had dismantled our life. This was the prize. I needed to understand what she was. I watched them for a few more minutes. They were like a parody of a happy couple, completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world. David paid for the art book with a flash of a platinum credit card, another asset I was sure he was hiding. As they turned to leave, I made a decision. I had to talk to her. I let them exit the store, then followed at a distance. They walked down the street, his hand resting on the small of her back. They stopped outside a chic cafe. He kissed her forehead. "I'll just pop into the chemist next door for those travel tablets," he said. "Get us a table, my love. My love." The endearment was a fresh wound. This was my chance. As David disappeared into the pharmacy, I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, and walked into the cafe. Sarah had just settled at a small table by the window, placing the expensive art book beside her like a trophy. I approached her table. She looked up, a polite, questioning smile on her face. It didn't falter, not even when recognition, or perhaps just a woman's intuition, dawned in her eyes. "Sarah Jennings," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. The smile tightened. "Yes? Do I know you?" "My name is Ruth Miller," I said. I saw the name land. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and a faint flush crept up her neck. She recovered quickly, her expression shifting to one of cool condescension. "David's wife," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. She didn't invite me to sit. "I was his wife, yes," I replied, pulling out the chair opposite her and sitting down anyway. The power move was pure Clara. "I see you're enjoying the fruits of my labor." She had the decency to look momentarily flustered. "I don't know what you mean." "The art book," I said, nodding toward it. "Bali. It looks lovely. I was hoping to see it myself one day, with my husband. But it seems he had other plans." She leaned forward, her voice dropping, though the cafe was nearly empty. "Look, I don't know what David has told you, but what we have is real. He was miserable for years. Trapped. You can't hold a man hostage in a marriage that's been dead for a decade." I stared at her, this cliché come to life. She was reciting lines I was sure David had fed her. Trapped, miserable, dead for a decade. "Is that what he told you?" I asked, my head tilted. "That he was trapped? Did he mention who did the trapping? Was it me, when I supported him through law school, or when I raised his children, or when I managed his household so he could become a partner at his firm? Which part of my life's work was the prison, exactly?" Her confidence wavered. He said you didn't understand him. That you were comfortable. That you lived in a world of school runs and grocery lists and had no ambition for anything more. Comfortable, another word for pitiable. He had a thesaurus for his disdain. "I see," I said softly. "And you, with your understanding and your ambition, you're the something more." "Yes," she said, her chin lifting defiantly. "We have a connection you could never comprehend. We're partners, in life, in business. Business, I repeated, latching onto the word. You mean S.J. Holdings? The company he's been funneling our joint assets into, the one that's a front for a Cayman Islands account. Her face went pale. She hadn't expected me to know the details. That's our venture capital firm. It's completely above board. Is it? I asked, my voice still quiet but lethally focused. Because the forensic accountant I've hired and the judge who will be reviewing his report tomorrow might disagree. You see, transferring marital assets to a shell company controlled by your girlfriend and then hiding them offshore isn't generally considered above board. It's called dissipation of assets. And forgery? Taking out a second mortgage by faking your wife's signature? That's a felony. I watched the blood drain completely from her face. She was no longer the confident other woman. She was a frightened girl who had just realized the man she was involved with was not just a charming escapee from a dull marriage, but a criminal who had implicated her in his crimes. He said everything was settled, she stammered. He said you'd get the house and be happy. He said the financial moves were just strategic to protect what was rightfully his from a messy divorce. I almost felt sorry for her. She was as much his victim as I was, just in a different way. He had sold her a fantasy, and she had bought it wholesale. Nothing about this is settled, I said, leaning in slightly. And nothing he has told you is true. He hasn't protected anything. He's put it all at risk, including you. If that money is deemed to be fraudulently transferred, the court can claw it back from you. Every cent. Her eyes were wide with panic now. He wouldn't. He loves me. Does he? I asked, my gaze unwavering. Or does he love the idea of a fresh start with a beautiful woman who doesn't know the first thing about the mess he left behind? A woman who believes his stories about a bitter, simple wife? Ask him about the email, Sarah, the one he sent you just before he left. Ask him what he meant when he said I was pitiable. Then ask yourself if you're really so different from me. You're just the newer model. I stood up, my legs shaking but my posture straight. The confrontation had been nothing like I'd imagined. There was no screaming, no hair pulling. It was a surgical strike. I had planted a seed of doubt that would, I hoped, grow into a forest of distrust. I hope the art book was worth it, I said, my final words hanging in the air between us. I turned and walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had seen the crack in her perfect facade. I had seen the first flicker of fear. As I walked away, the cool air hitting my face, I didn't feel the triumphant thrill of revenge. I felt a profound, weary sadness. She was just another person David had used. And lied to. But my pity for her was a fleeting thing. She had made her choices. The encounter had done something unexpected. It had stripped away the last of my emotional attachment to the why of David's betrayal. The other woman was no longer a mysterious, alluring siren. She was a deluded pawn. And David was not a complex man torn between duty and desire. He was a common, greedy liar. The hearing tomorrow was no longer about saving my marriage or winning back my children. It was a business transaction. It was about reclaiming what was mine and making a man who believed he was above consequence answer for his actions. The loneliness was still there, a constant companion. But as I walked back to my car, I realized it no longer felt like a void. It felt like space. Space to think, to breathe, to become someone new. And for the first time, the thought of filling that space by myself, on my own terms, didn't seem terrifying. It seemed like a promise. The morning of the emergency hearing dawned with a sky the color of bruised steel. I dressed carefully in the new gray suit, applied a little more makeup than usual to camouflage the lingering shadows of sleeplessness, and stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, composed, sharp, and radiating a quiet, formidable energy. It was the armor I needed for the battle ahead. Eleanor met me on the courthouse steps, a sleek briefcase in one hand. She looked me up and down, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Perfect. Remember, you are the wronged party. But you are not a victim. You are a claimant. Confident, not angry. Factual, not emotional. Let the numbers do the screaming for you. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, all dark wood and worn leather, smelling of lemon polish and anxiety. It was unnervingly quiet. David was already there, seated at the opposite table with a tall, expensively dressed man who must be his attorney. Julian Croft. David looked tense and pale beneath his tan, his jaw clenched. He refused to look at me. Good. Let him simmer. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Judge Irene Moore. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering for a moment on David and then on me, as if taking our measure. We are here on the petition of Ruth Miller for a temporary restraining order, spousal support, and a freeze on marital assets. She began, her voice crisp. Mr. Croft, I've read your opposition. Quite spirited. You maintain this is a simple case of marital discord and that your client is merely safeguarding assets from an acrimonious split. Julian Croft stood, oozing a smarmy confidence. Your Honor, that is precisely the case. My client, Mr. Miller, has been the sole financial provider for 30 years. Mrs. Miller has enjoyed a life of leisure. Now, facing a divorce, she is making wild, unsubstantiated accusations in a transparent attempt to secure a larger financial settlement than she is entitled to. This emergency is a fabrication. Eleanor stood, calm and still. Your Honor, if I may, this is not about entitlement. It is about criminal conduct. She held up a thick binder. We have provided the court with a forensic accounting report that details, with bank records and digital footprints, a pattern of systematic asset dissipation and concealment totaling over $800,000. We have evidence of a forged signature on a second mortgage. This is not marital discord. This is financial warfare. The judge took the binder, her expression unreadable. For the next hour, it was a duel of legal arguments. Croft dismissed the evidence as out-of-context financial maneuvers and the paranoid misinterpretations of a scorned wife. Eleanor methodically dismantled his claims, her voice a steady, relentless drumbeat of facts and figures. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand, my knees feeling like water, but my back ramrod straight. I took the oath, my voice clear. Eleanor guided me through the story, the discovery of the flight confirmation, the passwords, the shocking reality of the emptied accounts, the forged mortgage. I stuck to the facts, just as she had instructed. I described the transfers to S.J. Holdings, the emails to Sarah. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I was a witness to my own dismantling, and my calmness, I could see, was more powerful than any hysterics. When it was Croft's turn to cross-examine, he approached with a predatory smile. Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you have been, for all intents and purposes, financially dependent on your husband for your entire adult life? Yes, I said. And isn't it true that you have little to no understanding of the complex financial instruments and business ventures required to maintain the wealth you've become accustomed to? I understand theft and forgery, I replied evenly. The complexity is just a smokescreen. He blinked, thrown by the directness. You admit you invaded your husband's private emails and files. I accessed our joint financial accounts and discovered evidence of a crime in the marital home. I corrected him. I had every right. He tried a different tack, his tone becoming condescending. Mrs. Miller, let's be frank. You're hurt, you're angry. Your husband has moved on. Isn't this entire spectacle really just about that? About punishing him for falling out of love with you? I looked directly at him, and then I let my gaze shift to David, who was finally looking at me, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He thought Croft had me. No, Mr. Croft, I said, my voice dropping, becoming almost conversational. This is about a man who believed that because I managed a home instead of a portfolio, my intelligence and my contribution were worthless. This is about holding him accountable for that miscalculation. The smirk vanished from David's face. The judge watched me intently. Just as Croft was about to launch another attack, the courtroom door opened, and a young woman, Eleanor's paralegal, hurried in. She handed Eleanor a single sheet of paper. Eleanor's eyes scanned it, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. It was a look I would never forget. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, rising. "I apologize for the interruption, but we have just received new information, forwarded to us by Mr. Ben Carter, that is directly relevant to these proceedings. With the court's permission?" Judge Moore nodded, curious. "Proceed." Eleanor turned to address the room. "In tracking the flow of funds from the marital accounts, Mr. Carter noticed that a significant portion, after being filtered through the S.J. Holdings shell, was not, in fact, sent to the Cayman Islands. Instead, it was invested in a private high-yield venture fund based in Singapore called Apex Horizon." I saw David stiffen, his face turning a sickly gray. Croft looked momentarily confused. This was new. "Apex Horizon," Eleanor continued, her voice ringing with clarity, "is currently the subject of a multi-jurisdictional SEC investigation for operating a massive Ponzi scheme. The founders were arrested yesterday. The fund is insolvent. It has collapsed." A stunned silence filled the courtroom. "What this means, Your Honor," Eleanor said, driving the point home with surgical precision, "is that the nearly $500,000 my client's husband stole from her and invested is gone, vaporized. But more importantly, because Mr. Miller invested these stolen, marital funds into a known now exposed criminal enterprise, he has not only dissipated the assets, he has exposed the entire marital estate to potential civil and criminal liability. The SEC may very well come looking to claw back those investments from us." It was the karma twist, delivered not by a cosmic force, but by a forensic accountant with a sharp eye. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of poetic justice, after all. David looked like he'd been shot. He slumped in his chair, his hand going to his forehead. All the color had drained from his face. His grand plan, his escape fund, had not just been discovered, it had imploded, taking his future with it. Julian Croft was frantically shuffling papers, utterly blindsided. "Your Honor, this is unsubstantiated. We need time." "Time is precisely what we are here to address, Mr. Croft," Judge Moore said, her voice cold. She turned to Eleanor. "Miss Vance, you are asking for a freeze on all remaining assets." "Yes, Your Honor. To prevent any further catastrophic financial decisions by Mr. Miller. We are also requesting that the court order the immediate repatriation of any remaining funds offshore and that Mr. Miller be required to pay temporary spousal support at a level commensurate with the marital standard of living, pending the full discovery and trial." The judge didn't hesitate. She looked at David with undisguised disdain. Mr. Miller, you have engaged in a breathtaking campaign of financial deception and outright fraud against your wife. You have not only broken the vows of your marriage, you have broken the law. The notion that you are safeguarding assets is ludicrous. You are a proven financial danger to the marital estate. She granted every one of Eleanor's requests. The asset freeze was immediate and comprehensive. Spousal support was set at a number that made even me gasp, a number designed to maintain me in the family home and lifestyle, funded directly from David's frozen accounts. He was ordered to pay all my legal and expert fees. He was also given 30 days to repatriate every cent from the Cayman Islands or face contempt. As the judge brought down her gavel, the finality of the sound echoed in the silent room. It was over, for now. I stood up, my legs weak with relief. Eleanor placed a steadying hand on my arm. "He's finished, Ruth," she murmured. This was a total victory. I looked across at David. He was staring blankly at the wall, a broken man. The man who had called me pitiable was now the one who looked utterly defeated. The house of cards he had built with his lies and his arrogance had collapsed, and he was buried in the rubble. There was no joy in it, no triumphant thrill, just a vast, hollow exhaustion. As I walked out of the courtroom, leaving the wreckage of David's ambitions behind me, I realized the battle for the money was won. But the war for my life was just beginning. The discovery of his final, foolish gamble hadn't just secured my financial future, it had irrevocably severed the last, fragile tie that bound me to the woman I used to be. I was free. The thought was as terrifying as it was liberating. The fallout from the hearing was swift and brutal, a silent tsunami of consequence that rolled out from the sterile courtroom into the messy reality of our lives. David was legally and financially shackled. The asset freeze was so comprehensive he couldn't even access his own personal checking account without court approval. The spousal support order meant a significant portion of his remaining income was automatically diverted to me each month. The man who had prized control above all else was now utterly controlled by the court he had arrogantly believed he could outsmart. He was forced to return from Thailand, his sabbatical cut short by the cold, hard demands of the law. I heard through Eleanor that he was staying in a bland, extended-stay hotel near the airport, a far cry from the Balinese villas and his imagined future. The poetic justice was not lost on me. For a few weeks there was only silence from his camp. I used the time to breathe, to exist in the strange new peace of my home without the constant undercurrent of dread. The financial pressure was off. I could pay the bills, buy groceries, even allow myself a new book from the shop downtown without a pang of guilt. It was a novel, profound sensation, security. But the silence was a lie, a calm before the final, desperate storm. It began with a letter from Mark, delivered not by email or text, but by old-fashioned post, as if the formality could lend weight to its contents. The handwriting was his, sharp and aggressive. "Mom, I don't know what you said or did in that courtroom, but you've destroyed Dad. He's a shell of himself. He's talking about losing his partnership, about being disgraced. Is this what you wanted? To see him broken? We are still your family. Or we could be, but you have to stop this madness. Drop the case. Let him have a chance to rebuild. Be the bigger person. Your son, Mark." I read it once, then again, my hand trembling slightly. The manipulation was so transparent, yet it still had the power to wound. Be the bigger person. The mantra of those who benefit from your silence. I didn't rip it up. I placed it in the growing file with all the other evidence, a testament to my son's corrupted allegiance. The next day, it was Chloe. She came to the house unannounced. I saw her through the peephole, looking less like a vicious fashion plate and more like a lost, anxious child. I considered not answering, but a part of me, the stubborn, maternal part, still hoped for a crack, a sliver of remorse. I opened the door. She didn't try to push past me this time. She stood on the welcome mat, wringing her hands. "Mum," she said, her voice small. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked into the living room, her eyes darting around as if seeing it for the first time. "Look," she began, not meeting my gaze. "I know things got heated last time. I said some things I didn't mean." I remained silent, waiting. "It's just, this is all so awful." "Dad, he's really sorry, Mum." "He is. He knows he messed up. He wants to talk to you. To fix this." "Fix what, Chloe?" I asked, my voice quiet. "The fraud? The forgery? The fact that he lost $500,000 of our money in a Ponzi scheme? Or just the part where he called me pitiable to his girlfriend?" She flinched. "He was under a lot of stress. He wasn't himself, but he's realized now what he's lost. He misses you. He misses us. We could be a family again." The audacity of it took my breath away. It was the same narrative, just repackaged. He wasn't a criminal. He was a stressed-out man. He wasn't sorry for his actions. He was sorry he got caught. And family was a lever they were trying to pull to get me to fall in line. "Chloe," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "There is no family to go back to. That family was a fiction. Your father saw to that. I am not interested in his apologies or his regrets. The only thing I am interested in is the final divorce decree." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they seemed to be of genuine frustration. "Why are you being so cold? So hard? This isn't you." "You're right," I said, a sad smile touching my lips. "It isn't the me you knew. The me you knew would have forgiven him. The me you knew would have swallowed her pain to keep the peace. That woman is gone. Your father and your brother, you killed her. And I have to tell you, I don't miss her very much." She stared at me, truly seeing the transformation for the first time. The softness was gone, replaced by an unyielding core. She had no weapons left. "He wants to see you," she whispered, a final, weak attempt. "He's waiting at the park, the one by the old bandstand. Please, Mum, just hear him out." I knew it was a trap, a pathetic last-ditch effort at emotional manipulation, but something in me wanted to see it. I wanted to look the ghost of my old life in the eye one last time and formally say goodbye. "All right," I said, "I'll go." The park was nearly empty in the late afternoon light, the air crisp. He was there, sitting on a bench facing the pond, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, diminished. The expensive linen clothes were gone, replaced by a generic windbreaker and khakis. He stood up as I approached, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Ruth," he said, and his voice was ragged, "thank you for coming." I didn't sit. I remained standing, a few feet away, a safe distance. He cleared his throat, his eyes pleading. I know I've made a mess of things. A terrible, terrible mess. I don't know what came over me. It was like a fever dream. But it's broken now. I see everything so clearly." He launched into a monologue that felt rehearsed. He was sorry. He was a fool. He had taken me for granted. He missed our life, our partnership. He blamed the pressure, his own midlife insecurities. It was a symphony of excuses, a greatest hits album of a man who refused to take full responsibility. "And this legal battle," he continued, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "It's destroying us, Ruth. It's costing a fortune in legal fees. It's turning the children against us. We could stop it. Today, we could dismiss the lawyers, sit down like civilized people, and work out a fair settlement just between us. You can have the house, a generous allowance. We can put this all behind us, and maybe, in time." He let the sentence hang, a grotesque, hopeful question mark in the air. I looked at him, this stranger I had shared a bed with for 3 decades. I saw the calculation in his eyes, buried beneath the ballion of remorse. He wasn't sorry he had betrayed me. He was sorry his betrayal had failed. He wasn't offering reconciliation. He was offering a cheaper, quieter surrender. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice flat. The hope in his eyes flickered and died. "Ruth, please." "No, David," I said, cutting him off. "You don't get to please me. You don't get to talk about fair settlements after you tried to steal everything and leave me destitute. You don't get to talk about the children after you used them as pawns in your lies. There is no behind us. There is only the mess you made and the court order that is forcing you to clean it up." His face hardened, the mask of contrition slipping away to reveal the furious, cornered man beneath. "You're going to regret this, Ruth, when you're all alone in that big, empty house, when the children want nothing to do with you. You're choosing loneliness." I actually smiled then, a small, genuine smile that seemed to confuse him. "You still don't get it, do you? I was never more lonely than when I was married to you. The loneliness I have now? It has peace, it has dignity, it's mine. And I will take it over the lies of family you're selling every single time." I turned to leave. The reckoning was over. He had been judged, not just by the court, but by me. And he had been found wanting. Goodbye, David. I walked away from the bench, from the man, from the ghost of my past. I didn't look back. The autumn sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows, but I felt lighter than I had in years. He had offered me a return to my cage, and I had chosen the wide, open sky of my own freedom, no matter how lonely it might be. It was, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, the best choice I had ever made. The final divorce decree arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope from Eleanor Vance's office. I carried it to the kitchen table, my hand steady, and slid it open with a butter knife. The document was dense with legalese, but the essential facts were clear. It was over. The judge had been merciless, and Eleanor had been brilliant. The house was mine, free and clear, the fraudulent second mortgage voided. I was awarded a lump sum settlement, from the remaining liquid assets a figure that made my head swim along with permanent, substantial spousal support. David was ordered to bear the full cost of my legal fees and the forensic accounting. The Ponzi scheme money was gone, a black hole for which he was solely responsible. The reckoning was complete, enshrined in the unforgiving language of the law. I set the papers down on the table. I expected to feel something monumental, a surge of victory, a collapse of relief, a final, grieving sob for what was lost. But I felt none of those things. Instead, there was a profound, echoing quiet. It was the silence after a long, deafening noise has finally ceased. The Miller versus Miller case was closed, but Ruth Miller's life was just beginning. The big, beautiful family home now felt like a museum, a monument to a life that no longer existed. Every room was a diorama of a past I had outgrown. The formal dining room, where we'd hosted tedious dinner parties for David's colleagues. The sprawling lawn that had been a stage for children's birthday parties long past. The master bedroom that held the ghost of a marriage. It was too much house for one person, too much history. A week after the decree, I called a realtor. When I told Auntie Clara, she merely nodded. Sensible. That place was always more his trophy than your home. Selling the house was my first, definitive act of building a new life on my own terms. The process was surprisingly cathartic. I didn't just pack, I purged. I donated bag after bag of David's remaining belongings to charity. I sorted through 30 years of accumulated stuff, the children's old school projects, my collection of cookbooks I never used, the ugly vase David's mother had given us that I'd always hated. I kept only what brought me joy or held pure, uncomplicated memories. The rest I let go. The house sold quickly, for far over the asking price. On the day of the closing, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The echoes were gone. It was just a shell now, waiting for a new family to fill it with their own dreams and dramas. I felt no sadness, only a light, unburdened sense of closure. With the proceeds from the house and my settlement, I was, for the first time in my life, financially independent. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating. I could do anything, go anywhere. The world, which had felt so small and confined for so long, suddenly seemed vast with possibility. I spent a month traveling, not to exotic, far-flung places, but to quiet coastal towns I'd always seen in pictures. I walked on windswept beaches in Maine, ate lobster rolls from paper boats, and sat in cozy inns, reading novels for hours without interruption. I didn't have to consult anyone on the itinerary. I didn't have to be anywhere, or be anyone, for anyone else. It was on one of these trips, in a small, sun-drenched village on the Oregon coast, that I found it. It was a cottage, perched on a bluff overlooking the sea. It was nothing like the grand, imposing home I'd left behind. It was small, painted a cheerful sky blue with white trim, with a wild, untamed garden, and a wide porch that faced the endless Pacific. The moment I saw it, a feeling of rightness settled over me, a deep, cellular sense of home. I bought it. The decision was instantaneous, made not from logic, but from a heart that finally knew what it wanted. Moving in was a quiet affair. Just me, a few hired movers with my carefully curated belongings, and the sound of the waves. I placed my favorite armchair by the large front window, facing the ocean. I hung the few pieces of art I loved on the freshly painted walls. I stocked the small galley kitchen with good olive oil, sea salt, and my mother's old cast-iron skillet. It was mine. Every square inch. The first night I spent alone in the cottage, I lit a fire in the wood-burning stove, poured a glass of wine, and sat in my chair. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic crash and sigh of the surf below. The loneliness I had once feared so much was there, but it had transformed. It was no longer a hollow absence. It was a presence, a companionable, peaceful silence. It was the space in which I could finally hear my own thoughts. I didn't have a plan, and for the first time, that was okay. I didn't need one. I woke up when I wanted. I ate what I pleased. I spent whole days walking the beach, collecting sea glass and strange, twisted pieces of driftwood. I started a small, haphazard vegetable garden in the back, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or the confidence for. I made mistakes. I killed a basil plant and overwatered the tomatoes. It didn't matter. One afternoon, I was in the local hardware store, bewildered by the choices of paint for the spare room, when a woman about my age approached me. "The sea glass green is lovely," she said, pointing to a sample. "But it's darker than it looks on the chip. I learned that the hard way. turned my bathroom the color of a murky lagoon. I laughed. Thank you. You've just saved me from a lagoon bathroom. Annie, she said, sticking out her hand. You're the one who bought the blue cottage on the bluff, aren't you? Ruth, I said, shaking her hand. Guilty as charged. Annie became my first friend. She was a widow, a potter who lived a mile down the road. She introduced me to other people, a retired librarian, a couple who ran the local bookstore, a fisherman and his wife. They knew nothing of my past, of David, of the betrayal and the court case. They knew me only as Ruth, the woman in the blue cottage who was a bit hopeless in the garden but made a decent apple pie. It was a liberation unlike any other. This quiet liberation wasn't about dramatic reinvention. It was about the slow, gentle process of becoming myself. It was in the simple pleasure of drinking my coffee on the porch as the sun rose over the water. It was in the satisfaction of fixing a leaky faucet myself, with the help of a YouTube tutorial. It was in the peace of an empty calendar, and the joy of filling it only with things that nourished my soul. The past was not forgotten. The scars from David's betrayal and my children's rejection were still there, a part of my history. But they no longer defined me. They were like the fossils sometimes uncovered in the cliffs near. My home evidence of an ancient, turbulent life, now still and silent, layered over with new, resilient growth. I was free, not because a judge had declared it, but because I had built a life where I could finally breathe. The quiet was no longer empty, it was full of me. The first year in the blue cottage was a lesson in a new kind of rhythm. It was not the frantic metronomic tick of a life governed by school bells, business meetings, and other people's needs. This was a slower, more organic tempo, set by the tides, the weather, and the quiet inclinations of my own heart. I learned the patterns of the light as it moved across my living room floor. I learned which days the fishermen would bring their fresh catch to the little market in town. I learned to distinguish the cry of the gulls from the screech of the eagles that nested further down the coast. This new life was not a single bold stroke of paint on a blank canvas. It was a mosaic, a patient, piece by piece, assembly of small, colored fragments that, when stepped back from, began to form a picture of a woman I was finally getting to know. It started with the garden. My initial, haphazard attempts had been a comedy of errors. Annie, my potter friend, had taken pity on me. One Saturday she arrived with a tray of seedling starters, a bag of rich, dark compost, and a no-nonsense attitude. Right, she'd said, pulling on a pair of worn leather gloves. Forget the tomatoes for now. They're divas. We'll start with things that actually want to live here. Rosemary, lavender, some kale, because it's practically a weed. Under her tutelage, my hands, which had only ever been proficient with a rolling pin and a vacuum cleaner, learned the feel of damp earth. I learned to space the plants, to water their roots and not their leaves, to pinch off the dead blooms to encourage new growth. It was a quiet, repetitive therapy. There was no instant gratification, only the slow, certain promise that care and patience would yield something green and alive. I began to see the metaphor in every turned bed of soil. My friendship with Annie deepened. We didn't talk about our past pains much. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a recognition of survival in each other's eyes. Instead, we talked about clay and glazes, about books, about the absurd price of fish lately. She taught me how to throw a pot on her wheel, my hands clumsy and unsure at first, then gradually finding a center, a balance. The first lopsided, thick-walled bowl I produced was, to me, a greater treasure than any fine china I'd ever owned. Through Annie, I met others. There was Maeve, the retired librarian, who ran a tiny book club that was really just an excuse for four women to drink wine and talk about their lives, with a book vaguely in the background. There was Leo, the gruff fisherman who, once he decided I wasn't a fussy city person, would save me the best piece of halibut. These were not the intense, performative friendships of my old life, built around children's activities and husbands' careers. These were easy, undemanding connections. We were simply neighbors, sharing a small, beautiful corner of the world. I also started to write. It began as a way to untangle the snarl of thoughts in my head, the lingering anger, the flashes of grief, the startling moments of joy. I bought a simple, beautiful journal and a smooth writing pen, and I would sit on my porch in the mornings and just pour it out. The words were messy and raw at first, a chaotic spill of emotion. But as the months passed, my writing began to change. I wrote less about David and the betrayal, and more about the sea otters I saw playing in the kelp beds, the taste of the first strawberry from my garden, the way the fog rolled in, swallowing the world in a soft, gray silence. I was documenting my own renaissance. One afternoon, I was in the local art supply store, buying more journals, when I saw a flyer, tacked to a community board, seeking submissions for Tides and Tales, a quarterly journal of coastal living, personal essays, poetry, photography, stories from those who call the shore home. I stood there, staring at the flyer, my heart doing a funny little flip-flop. A voice in my head, one that sounded suspiciously like David's, whispered, "Don't be ridiculous. What could you possibly have to say?" But a newer, stronger voice, my own, answered back, "Why not?" That night, I took one of my journal entries, a piece about the day I'd bought the cottage, about that feeling of rightness, and I typed it up. I polished it, shaped it, and gave it a title, The Blue Door. With a deep breath and a trembling finger, I emailed it to the address on the flyer. I put it out of my mind, or tried to. The rhythms of my life continued. The garden flourished. I had dinner with Annie. I walked the beach. Then, 3 weeks later, an email appeared in my inbox. The editor of Tides and Tales loved my piece. They wanted to publish it in their next issue. When the journal came out, there it was, my name, Ruth Miller, in print. I held the slim publication in my hands, the smell of fresh ink filling my senses, and I cried. Not tears of sadness, but of profound, overwhelming validation. I had a voice. It was quiet, perhaps, but it was mine, and someone had found it worth listening to. That small publication led to another, and then a request to write a regular column about finding a second act by the sea. It wasn't a career, it wasn't for money. It was a thread I was adding to my mosaic, a thread made of words and connection. The past was not entirely absent. Mark had sent one more letter, a terse note informing me he was moving to Singapore for a new job. There was no request to see me before he left. Chloe's social media, which I checked only rarely, and only when I felt strong enough, was a curated gallery of her life in the city, filled with pictures of expensive brunches and glamorous parties. There were no mentions of a mother. The pain of their absence was a dull, permanent ache, like an old injury that twinges when the weather changes. But the searing, incapacitating agony was gone. I had built a life around the ache, and the life was now larger than the pain. One evening, I stood on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of violet and gold. The air was cool, smelling of salt, and the rosemary bush now thriving by my steps. I could hear Maeve laughing from her garden next door, and the faint clang of a buoy out in the channel. My life was not what I had planned. It was not the crowded, noisy family life I had envisioned in my youth. It was quieter, smaller in scale, but infinitely richer in texture. I had taken the shattered pieces of the life I'd had, the betrayal, the loneliness, the rejection, and I had not tried to glue them back into their original form. Instead, I was carefully, patiently, gathering them alongside new, beautiful pieces: friendship, creativity, independence, peace, and setting them into a new foundation. The mosaic was far from finished. But for the first time, I could finally see the emerging pattern, and it was strong, and it was beautiful, and it was uniquely, authentically mine. The storm rolled in from the sea just after midnight, a magnificent, roaring beast of wind and water. I stood at my large front window, a thick wool blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and watched it. The world beyond the glass was a chaos of churning black waves and driving rain, the sky ripped open by forks of lightning that illuminated the frantic, white-capped sea. A few years ago, a storm like this would have filled me with a deep, existential dread, a mirror of the turmoil inside me. I would have felt small, exposed, and terribly alone. But tonight, I felt only a thrilling reverence. The solid cottage around me creaked and groaned, a steadfast ship riding out the tempest. The fire in my wood stove burned bright and warm. I was safe. I was dry. I was, in the heart of the maelstrom, profoundly at peace. When the storm finally exhausted itself, just before dawn, a bruised, quiet light filtered through the clouds. I put on my boots and my oldest waxed coat and walked out into the washed, clean world. The air was sharp and electric. I walked down the path to the beach, my feet sinking into the rain-softened sand. The shore was littered with the storm's offerings: tangles of kelp, pieces of splintered wood, and a treasure trove of sea glass, tossed up from the deep. I walked for a long time, my hands in my pockets, my breath misting in the cool air. This was my life now, not a constant, placid happiness that was a fantasy sold in magazines. It was this: moments of fierce, wild beauty followed by a deep, earned calm. It was the understanding that after every storm there is a shore waiting to be explored, littered with both wreckage and unexpected gems. I thought of the woman I had been, the one who had stood in a silent, spotless kitchen, feeling the walls of her life close in. She felt like a character from a book I'd read long ago. Her pain was real, her fear was valid, but her understanding of the world was so small. She believed that to be alone was to be lost. She believed that her value was inextricably tied to her utility to others. She believed that the family she had built was a fortress, when, in reality, it was a house of cards, vulnerable to the slightest dishonest breeze. Sitting on a familiar, wave-smooth log, I watched the sun finally break through the clouds, setting the wet world ablaze with light. And I thought about the lessons, the hard-won pieces of wisdom that were now the bedrock of my soul. If I could, I would go back and whisper them to that heartbroken woman. But since I couldn't, I would speak them now, to the wind and the waves, and to anyone else who might need to hear them. The first lesson was about loneliness. We are taught to fear it, to fill it with noise and people and distraction at any cost. But I have learned that loneliness is not the enemy. It is the forge. In that searing, initial silence, when everyone else has fallen away, you are forced to meet yourself. It is terrifying. It is also the greatest opportunity you will ever be given. The loneliness I so desperately feared became the sacred space where I rediscovered my own voice, my own company, my own strength. It wasn't an emptiness, it was a birthing room. The second lesson was about worth. For most of my life, I let others define mine. I was a good wife, a devoted mother, a capable homemaker. When those titles were stripped away, I felt I was nothing. But I was wrong. My worth was not external. It wasn't in the casseroles I baked or the socks I paired. It was internal, a quiet, unshakable constant that had been there all along, buried under layers of duty and expectation. You are not what you do for others, you are. Full stop, and that is enough. The third lesson was about family. We cling to the idea of blood being thicker than water, that family is everything. But sometimes, family is the source of the deepest pain. And sometimes, family is the one you choose, the fierce aunt who speaks hard truths. The friend who shows up with seedlings and tough love, the community of strangers who become your anchor. Loyalty must be earned, not assumed. And it is a two-way street. You cannot pour yourself into a vessel that has a crack at its base. It is not a failure to walk away from people who poison your soul, even if they share your DNA. It is an act of profound self-respect. And the final lesson, the one that tied all the others together, was about strength. I always thought strength was about endurance, about bearing the unbearable, swallowing the pain, keeping a stiff upper lip. I was wrong. True strength is not passive. It is not about how much you can withstand. It is about the courage to say no more. It is about the willingness to walk into the unknown, to face the terrifying prospect of a blank page, and to begin writing a new story, line by painful, glorious line. Strength is not a fortress. It is a root system, deep and wide and flexible, allowing you to bend in the storm without breaking. A shadow fell across the sand in front of me. I looked up. It was Annie, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Saw you walking down here," she said, her voice raspy with sleep. "Figured you could use this." She handed me a mug of strong, black coffee. I took it, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. "Thank you." She sat beside me on the log, and we drank our coffee in a comfortable silence, watching the ocean slowly calm itself. We didn't need to talk about the storm, or the past, or the future. We were just 2 women, sharing a quiet moment on a vast, beautiful beach. After a while, she nodded toward a piece of sea glass nestled in the sand near my boot. It was a rare, deep cobalt blue, worn smooth and opaque by decades of tumbling in the waves. "That's a good one," she said. I picked it up. It was cool and perfect in my palm, a jewel created from what was once broken and discarded. "It is," I agreed. I slipped it into my pocket. I would add it to the mosaic I was building on my patio table, a sprawling, ongoing project of found objects and colored tiles. It was a messy, imperfect, beautiful work in progress, just like me. They forgot about me. David in his pursuit of a new life, Mark and Chloe in their worship of his false narrative. They cast me aside, thinking me weak, thinking me irrelevant. In doing so, they handed me the greatest gift I have ever received, the gift of myself. I am Ruth. I am 57 years old. I live in a blue cottage by the sea. I am a gardener, a writer, a friend. I have known profound betrayal, and I have known a peace so deep it feels like a second heartbeat. The tapestry of my life is woven with threads of gold and threads of grief, and I would not pull out a single one, for they have all made the pattern what it is. Strong, complex, and uniquely, beautifully mine. The loneliness did not break me, it built me. And in the quiet, I found a voice that is finally, unapologetically, my own. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.